Ever since there was DBD and the possibility of licenses entering it existed, Five Nights at Freddy's name was dropped into the mix, a license so widely desired by the community that there are multiple instances of people mistaking completely different licenses and their trailers with Five Nights at Freddy's. Take the Pinhead teaser back in August of 2021. Many FNAF copers saw this TV and an 87 in the corner and went straight to it being a Five Nights at Freddy's teaser or FNAF bait. This happened a lot over the years too. People really wanted to see Five Nights at Freddy's in DBD. Then, like a miracle, and honestly a bit out of the blue in 2024, Five Nights at Freddy's was finally revealed to be coming to Dead by Daylight in the summer of 2025, all revealed through a simple tweet. This tweet became absolutely huge, amassing over 300,000 likes over the span of just a few weeks. Hype like no other. Hey everyone, today I wanted to discuss with you how Five Nights at Freddy's will change Dead by Daylight forever, for good or for bad. Out of the many properties present in Dead by Daylight, all with huge communities and individual followings, none have come close to the hype for Five Nights at Freddy's. This is why too though this chapter will surely change DBD's trajectory going forward. Over the years, there's been 3 other releases I would argue that have come close, which were Halloween in 2016, Stranger Things in 2019, and Resident Evil in 2021. Halloween due to it being the first ever license, and introducing the possibility of licenses at all. Then the Stranger Things and Resident Evil chapters were huge numbers-wise, but also due to their huge online followings individually that led to mass player influx for DBD. These chapters also led to positive updates hitting DBD though. Stranger Things back in 2019 seemed to be a huge trigger for DBD, with the devs deciding to release and work on the progression system, but also lore side of the game too actually. The Tomes and Rift were both launched just months before Stranger Things came out. We know too that the devs work on chapters around a year before they actually release, so these things coinciding is surely not coincidence. They knew the potential Stranger Things had, and so they launched this huge game-changing update prior to it. Resident Evil was not too dissimilar. It had the introduction of bots alongside it, new perk types with the announcement of boons, and of course throughout this time and the year before, the Realm Beyond update was going on, a revamp and rework to many older maps at the time. Now come to Five Nights at Freddy's, we've had a similar thing. Just last year we got the introduction of Unreal Engine 5, and recently the health update announcement. A huge part of why these changes are even happening, in my opinion, are down to behavior being aware of the titan of a chapter that they're about to release. Knowing this, they feel the gamble of less content for a while is a good trade-off, so that FNAF is a whole lot more stable when it comes out. I really don't think it's much of a gamble either. All signs point to FNAF being huge, so whilst content is a little bare for now, it's surely worth it. These changes are also going to have a huge impact on DBD's future, and so will Five Nights at Freddy's. So that's the first thing. FNAF releasing is going to have knock-on effects, and this is definitely one of them, the health update. When a chapter is slated by the community to be so big, the devs are implementing huge game-changing updates, you know that they think the same too. It's really just an all-around positive in that sense. Another question many have been asking though, is if DBD is really ready for this chapter. And this is a fair question too I think, especially looking at the history of some bigger chapters. Take the Resident Evil chapter for example in June 2021, where it released with a lot of issues relating to the map, the RPD. It was causing lag and even crashing on consoles, leading to its multiple kill switches early on. I'm not sure if these were caused by health related updates at the time, or if it was just a present issue, but it does make it slightly concerning for Five Nights at Freddy's release. Pairing it up alongside these health changes, rather than them coming months before, is a bit of a risk, and the difference I would argue between some older cases. Some of these health changes do sort of have the potential to cause some serious issues if they go wrong. Say the surrender option ends up being really negative or unhealthy, or the new spawn rules or hiding prevention. It's a bit doom and gloom, and I don't necessarily believe these things are going to go badly, but I do think it's a consideration. It's pairing up, after all, the game's biggest release with debatably the game's biggest quality of life and health shift together in the same couple of months. So far I do think it's looking very positive, but whatever the outcome, DBD is going to be forever changed, I think, in the coming months. The other way I think FNAF is going to change DBD to be slightly more positive again is by means of introducing some more fun and creativity, I hope. Much like the health update, I'm sort of hoping that once we get Five Nights at Freddy's, which is another license on the end of a long string at the moment, we might get a bit more original content for a while, which I do think would be very refreshing. A huge chapter like this, after all, is going to be a relief, I'm sure, and allow freer work, hopefully, on original content, and potentially even older original content such as reworks, but also things the devs have mentioned in the past, like older chapters getting maps and stuff like that. They've mentioned before that these things generally don't really come, despite them liking the idea to, and it's mainly down to a balance of added value, profit, and their time. Maybe it's a little bold of me to assume, but I would hope this means we might get stuff like this in the coming year. Maps for older content that didn't get any, and things like that. Or even just, reworks and things. More health related and gameplay balancing decisions. Maybe that's more of a priority, to be fair, instead of doing even more maps. I also just think, going back to Five Nights at Freddy's a bit more, that it's likely going to be quite a unique chapter. After all, it's pretty different and not really something we've had before as a property that's based on a game, but also a lot of internet culture and presence. Something a lot more recent too, where other titles such as Resident Evil or Silent Hill have been around for decades. It's almost like the Stranger Things equivalent of the gaming or online world. This would mean we get something really different with this release. A real game changer. A chapter which is unique in the grand scheme of things. A chapter which hopefully pushes some boundaries too. I think this chapter is going to be packed with references and Easter eggs, likely a lot more fleshed out lore too, and I think a lot of cosmetics and things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. Like I said too though, I also think this is going to have a bit of a ripple effect on the wider game. Hopefully this stuff expands out into other areas of DBD also. A fear I've seen brought up a few times, and one I actually covered in a video, was that DBD is losing itself a bit due to its mass licenses recently. Go check it out if you like. Whatever your perspective is in that manner, I do think Five Nights at Freddy's will be positive either way, as it surely eases behavior having such a huge chapter, which hopefully does allow them to have more freedom, time, and resources for the future of the game. We saw one of the greatest chapters, I think, last year in the game's nearing 9-year history in all things Wicked. This chapter was incredible in almost every aspect, and it was original. We've had one original since then, and it has admittedly been quite a rocky one. So my hope going forward and post Five Nights at Freddy's is that we can get some more original licenses too. The next big reason for Five Nights at Freddy's changing the game forever is that it's a game that doesn't really do crossovers much, despite being so sought after as a property. I know, for example, there's a huge community in Fortnite too that really want Five Nights at Freddy's to come there, and many even that are surprised that it didn't come there first, despite the game's much larger player base. To me, this is really important too, because it means DBD is viewed as quite trusted to handle properties at this point. I mean, looking back, especially over the past year, and they've released some incredible and just really faithful content. Tokyo Ghoul, Castlevania, Dungeons & Dragons, Tomb Raider, Alan Wake, Chucky, Alien... They've all been so well recreated and transferred over to DBD despite all the differences between these properties. They're all unique in one way or another, with unique styles, forms, even genres to some extent, yet DBD has nailed them all. That's quite an endorsement, I think at least, and I think quite likely the reason we are getting Five Nights at Freddy's. This chapter I don't think would have come without these prior. Adding Five Nights at Freddy's to that list surely just endorses them even more, and it's a knock-on effect. A positive knock-on effect with each license on the belt. It'll surely be slightly easier to get the next, especially after you add a huge one like Five Nights at Freddy's, where before they may have been tougher to acquire. There's a bunch personally I would love to see that are from quite big properties, such as The Walking Dead and even something like It, although maybe that's going a little too far in likelihood. I think Five Nights at Freddy's also endorses them though for slightly more unique licenses, ones that might appear to not be that fitting initially, but would be movie after reflection. Five Nights at Freddy's is definitely horror, I'm not disputing that at all, but it is a more modern and unique type of it, I think, in a very positive way. I for one would love if they started going more in this direction of more horror adjacent properties like they have recently. I'd love to see Fallout, Elden Ring, and even Star Wars. My point overall here is that I think Five Nights at Freddy's will have a huge positive impact on future chapters, whether licensed or original, even if it may end up being the peak in terms of impact, which is what I want to talk about next. The final thing is slightly more negative, although not entirely as it's structured on a positive, but that's the fact that DBD loses what is debatably its most hyped license when Five Nights at Freddy's is added. And a huge part of DBD and the year-to-year, month-to-month hype of it that surrounds the game is license hype and speculation. Maybe this is jumping the gun a little, assuming there's nothing hype-worthy after this, which isn't the case, but it definitely will change the dynamic a bit. Five Nights at Freddy's was always this huge talking point, and even seemingly a reason people stuck around. What happens after the hype dies down, and what comes next? Well, it's not necessarily that there's a lack of licenses to talk about or look into. I'd recommend checking out Das Food's video on that topic, it's great. However, I do think nothing measures up to the hype. Five Nights at Freddy's could really be the peak. On one hand, it's hugely positive, hitting 9 years into the game's lifespan, and its peaking is sort of crazy, let's be honest. But afterwards, is it in a precarious situation? Is there a point for DBD when new licenses or content releasing just isn't going to cut it anymore, especially after a chapter like this? I think it's an interesting topic, and something I might want to discuss more in the future. Overall, I do really want this video to come across positively. I'm really hopeful and excited for this chapter on the whole, and I do think it's going to impact the game positively too. I also think it's important though to look at the possible other side to this as well. In general, how Five Nights at Freddy's is going to impact the game more widely. I've got lots to learn about Five Nights at Freddy's, but I'm really excited. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks, and goodbye.